So in this video, we're going to look at fractions and how to simplify them. But first, what we're going to do is just have a quick reminder of what a fraction is and where these numbers inside fractions come from. So if we just have a look at these first few diagrams, this is going to help us to understand what a fraction is. So think of this square as being one whole. Well, we can divide that whole into many different ways. So the most obvious way from this picture is we could split it into 4 pieces. Okay, so if we are splitting it into 4 pieces, then we have a denominator, and that is the bottom of a fraction, being 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But if we only have 3 of those pieces highlighted and we want to emphasize 3 out of these 4, then that's going to be our numerator. And as you can see, there are going to be 3 shaded in this example. So it's 3 out of 4. Now, of course, there are other ways of splitting up a whole. And underneath those diagonal lines, you can probably see some squares. So this is another example of how we can split up a shape. So if we consider those squares, well, if we worked out how many there were, there's going to be 36 different squares. So we could think of this same fraction as an amount out of 36 rather than out of 4. In fact, we can do this with any amount at all. So let's have a look at another example. Let's look at B and see if we can find some different equivalences this time in our fractions. So to start with, here again is our whole amount. Okay. So we can see with those thicker lines, let's highlight them now, that we could split it up into 8 pieces. And clearly we have 1, 2, 3 of them highlighted. So that shaded amount is 3 out of 8. But as well as considering this split into 8 pieces, we could also consider it split into more pieces than that. So in this particular example, if we think about those smaller squares, well, we have 6 down and we have 8 across. So if you consider all of those squares, there's going to be 48. Now, out of those 48 squares, how many are shaded? Well, there are going to be 6 there in the bottom left, another 6 there at the top in the middle, and another 6 there on the bottom right. So that is 18 squares shaded out of 48. So you can see with this example that 3 out of 8, so 3 of these boxes, is exactly the same as 18 out of 48. Okay, and so how do we get between the two? Well, without a picture, we are looking for some number that is a multiple of 3 and 8. And of course, in this case, look, we can times both 3 and 8 by 6 to get 18 over 48. This is how we know they are equivalent to each other. Okay, so now that we understand that, let's just see if we can make sure we can reflect backwards and look at some fractions and shade them in. So if I am looking to shade in a quarter, then that means I first of all look at the 4 and I need to split this shape into 4 pieces. So if I use the red pen to highlight those 4 pieces, you can see them now. And this top number, the numerator, means I want to highlight one of those 4 pieces. So there we go. That is 1/4. And of course, you can probably see straight away from here that 1/4 is the same thing as 4/16. These are equivalent to one another because there are 16 smaller squares with 4 shaded in. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Well, we need to split this shape into 5 pieces, and so it's done for us already. Look, okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we want to make sure we highlight 4 out of those 5. So very quickly, let's just shade in 4 out of the 5 pieces. There we go. And from here, we could also just have a quick look and see that, well, I've shaded in 16 smaller squares out of 20. So you can see that 4/5 is equivalent to 16 out of 20. Okay, now in C, this is more challenging. We have to shade in 7/8. So we need to split the shape up into 8 equal pieces? Well, the way to do this is to first of all split it in half, and then to split each half into quarters. And this way, we're going to have 8 equal pieces. So there's my 8 equal pieces. I need to shade in, I should say, 7 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there we go. That is 7/8. Let's move on. Right, in D, we've got to shade in 2/3. Well, we can do that. So we need to split it into 3 pieces because we want to think about thirds. So there we go. We've split it into 3 equal pieces, and we are looking to shade in 2 out of those 3 pieces. So there we are. We can see there 2/3 of that shape being shaded. Okay, so now it's time to take what we've applied there to some simplification. No more pictures. Let's just see if we can think about equivalent fractions and how to find them. So 3/4. Now, if we have a shape, and we won't do this again, but just for now, right? 3/4. Well, I could shade in 3 out of 4 pieces. So what is that in terms of 8? Well, on top of this, let's imagine splitting each one of those quarters into 2. So we have 8. Right, okay. So now the blue lines represent 8. So I've split it into 8 pieces. Well, how many 8s was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 3/4 is equivalent to 6 8s. Now, again, we want to look to find a number that multiplies or divides to get from one to the other. It has to be consistent. And clearly here, both of them multiply by 2 to get from the left to the right, or we could say divide by 2 to get from the right to the left. So let's now make this a little quicker and see if we can figure out the same thing again. Now look, to get from 5 to 10, it's going to be multiplying by 2. So that means we're going to need to times the top by 2 as well. So 2/5 is the same as 4/10. And very similar in question C, 7 to 14 means multiplying by 2. So that means we've got to multiply the 5 by 2. We're going to have 10. So 5/7 is the same thing as 10/14. Now, we were making the fractions, if you like, have bigger numbers. But really what we want to do is make them into their simplest form, which means have smaller numbers. So this time, rather than looking to multiply, we're going to look to divide. So let's start with the 8/24 and think about what 2 numbers they both divide by. Now, some of you may be thinking 8. Some of you may be thinking 4 or 2. All of these things are good. It doesn't matter which one we choose first, although you want to try and find the biggest one. So in this particular case, let's assume that you can see that they're both in the 2 times table. Well, that means what we need to do is divide them both by 2. So if I do that, I'm going to have 4/12. And now, once we've done that, we can look again. Can they be simplified further? And of course, yes, they can. Both of these 2 numbers are going to be in the 4 times table. So what we're going to need to do is divide them both by 4. Now, this is going to be 1/3. So from the beginning, our 8/24 in its simplest form is going to be 1/3. And what I could have done here, if I had spotted it, is notice that right at the beginning, 8 and 24 can both be divided by 8. And this would have done the same thing in one step. So I could have divided those both by 8. Now, let's look at part B. So B is 15/20. Hopefully, you can see what 2 numbers they both divide by. So they both divide by 5. So we're going to write 15/20. And we will divide by 5 to the top and the bottom. This is going to be 3/4. So there's our answer to B. And C also divides by 5. 20 and 25 are both in the 5 times table. So if I'm going to divide them both by 5, I'm going to have 4/5. So that's how we are going to simplify fractions. We're going to look for some number that multiplies, they can both divide by and simplify from there. So let's try one harder example. What about if we had something like 63 over 77? So this is a really difficult one. We need to think what times table is 63 and 77 in. And of course, they are both in the 7 times table. So we need to divide them both by 7. So 63 divided by 7 is going to be 9. Think of it as 9 times 7 making 63. And 77 divided by 7 is 11. So this is equivalent to 9 over 11. Hopefully this is all the information you need to simplify fractions and understand what fractions really are.